us in the opening prayer, as well as just reminding us that Christ is the center of it all. Sometimes when we go through a storm, we wonder whether God is there or not, right? And I think the book of Esther reminds us that actually God is right in the midst and in the thick of all the action. And I think the book of Esther, if you've been following through, there's so many lessons along the way. How I would like to do today is to do this, finish the study, and then on the final chapters. And then later on, we will look a little bit about how can we find God, or can we find Christ in the book of Esther in some ways. Then after that, I will open up for us to share a little bit from each one of us here. You're welcome to share what are some of the things you have learned along the way. I mean, we've gone through 9 lessons of Esther. This is the final lesson in the book of Esther, lesson number 10. Right. So please allow me to share my screen, and then we will be off. Again, I want to acknowledge and welcome every one of us here. We have got Swanky, Terence, Peter, Dave, Lily, Chiam, Brother Yap, Kwek, and Sister Annie, as well as Grace. Hi, good to see you. You're looking well. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then allow me to share my screen. The book of Esther, this is lesson 10, which I just titled it Dancing and Devotion. Okay? Dancing just to depict the fact that the Jews are celebrating their deliverance. Right? So we're looking from chapter 9, verse 20 to 10, verse 3. So as we understand that the overall picture is that we see the hidden hands of God watching over his people, his covenant people, and even though their very lives and existence and their name is being threatened to be wiped out, but God stepped in. And actually, in a sense that if we look at it, he has never, even though his name is not mentioned, even though he's silent, but yet he's never out of the picture. He is in every situation, even before the disaster strikes. He's already positioned his people in the right place at the right time. And that's where we see the Esther and Mordechai's role being explained and in this particular story. Okay? So we see the danger to God's people, the position of God's servant, and today we will look at the deliverance of God's people, the final part of it, the days of Purim, and the description of Mordecai's fame, right? So in a sense, in our lesson, we go through these 3 acts, from the danger of God's people, decision of God's servant, and also finally the deliverance of God's people. And last week, the last lesson, we actually covered the defense of the Jews from chapter 9, verse 1 to 19. And there are 5 things that we can learn from there. I may have mentioned it in passing, but I want to add in a couple more. Number 1 is that God's people always have an enemy to deal with, right? With God's people always have an enemy to overcome. The devil is hell-bent on our destruction, actually, right? And he wants to see us divided. He wants to see us discouraged, defeated, questioning. But the word of God, says that he's like a thief who comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. And Peter warns us that he's like a roaring lion seeking to devour anybody he can find. Right? So, but we are not unaware of the devil's schemes. And this is where the book of Esther reminds us that to be alert, about the dangers to ourselves and the spiritual dangers that we face every day. And we, as God's people, are in this situation together. Yeah? We need to look out for one another. We need to have compassion for one another. Okay? Number two is uh, knowing that who the enemy is, right? And we are not each other's enemy, right? So, but then we also see that God is always in complete control over every situation. He hears it all, He knows it all, He's omniscient, He's all powerful, and He will repay and reward, right? And every evil will be dealt with decisively, and that's a picture of Haman, right? He has schemes and he has, he thought he could have his way, he could buy his way into to control, into favor and all those things. He could exploit his position at the expense of others, but yet God stepped in, right? In the sense that remember, God is working behind the scenes, right? And Job chapter 42 verse 2 says, I can do. I'm sorry. I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. All right. Okay, so when God sets His mind on certain things, nothing can stop Him. Right. And we see the envy. The psalmist says in Psalm 73, when I look at the wicked, they seem to prosper, and he got so discouraged. But it was so painful for him. He was frustrated. But until he went into the sanctuary of the God, when he went into the sanctuary, into the presence of God, then he understood what their ultimate end is. Right? So God is always in complete control, even in the midst of our challenges. We see this. Sometimes we get frustrated by the things around us, by the situation around us, but yet God is. We have to trust that God is there. And God, of course, the lesson here we also learn is God uses ordinary people, people like Mordechai, people like Esther, who comes from, exiles. They are exiles in a foreign land. They don't have a rich background, but then they were able. God actually established them, right, to accomplish His extraordinary things. So these are the three things that you've learned. And also the fifth one is that the fourth one is that God promises ultimate victory for those who would persevere. I think this is something that to encourage us in these days where we sometimes feel like giving up. Now, why do we struggle? Why do we keep doing the things that God has entrusted us to do? Right? Whether it's at work, you put in your hours behind the scenes. You're not seen in a sense that your boss does not see you at work, so you may be unrecognized. Whatever it is, right? Or whether you work behind the scenes in terms of ministry, of giving, and you wonder, right? And you struggle. On also other areas of struggle in that way, our fight, our spiritual struggle, our struggle for holiness, our struggle to fight corruption, and to establish righteousness in the place where we work, all those things, right? But ultimately there'll be victory for those who persevere. And this challenge is actually a test of our faith as well, right? So this is something that's important. You see, what Esther did was she was willing to lay everything down on the line. If I perish, I perish. She was willing to pray, to fast, and to fight, to be overcomers. And Jesus also says that, that the one who is victorious, the one who overcomes, will be dressed in white. So He will never blot us out from the book of life. He will acknowledge that His name before my Father and His angels in heaven. So there is ultimate victory for us if we trust in the Lord. We trust in the Lord. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 36 reminds us that in the midst of all the struggles, the persecution, it says, if you need to persevere. Okay? So this is the theme. It says, don't give up, right? Don't give up doing the good that God has called us to do. Don't give up holding on to Jesus, just keeping Him in the center of our lives, so that when you have done the will of God, right, you will receive what He has promised. So Hebrews chapter 10 is a wonderful passage. I encourage you to read that as well. And And we need to celebrate and remember our deliverance. Okay? God's people need time to reflect and to celebrate. And this is what Esther 9 verse 16 and 19 just reminded, that they had won their fight against the enemies. They had successfully assembled and defended themselves. They did not lay their hands on the plunder. Their purpose was not to take advantage of the enemy, but it was just to defend themselves. And once the enemy is spotted, and they had a lot of enemies, 75,000 plus 300 plus 500 plus 300 plus of course Haman and his 10 sons as well. So those are the numbers. But it's a small number. It was a small number in a sense of compared to a larger population of Persia, but yet, yeah, the time to deal with the enemy has to be decisive, but also then you remember where the deliverance come from, right? So on the 15th day, they rested and make it a day of feasting and joy, right? So if you read, remind yourselves on that. Okay? So let's continue on as we spend some time just to read from 9 verse 20 to 32. Okay, and I will pause in the middle of this passage. So Mordechai, verse 20 of chapter 9, recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when the sorrow was turned into joy and the mourning into a day of celebration. Right? He wrote them to observe the days as the days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Why? It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, there's a command for them to celebrate. Yeah, there's a command to give them a holiday, right? And to celebrate these 2 days. Why 14th and 15th? We remember that the Jews in the rural area, they fought on the 13th and they rested on the 14th. But the Jews at Susa, at the citadel of Susa, actually fought for another day, right? On the 13th and 14th, and they rested on the 15th. So Mordecai says, okay, take these 2 days, 14th and 15th, celebrate. Let's celebrate this together. Remember this. So the Jews then agreed to continue the celebration, verse 23, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and to cast the poor, that is the lot, right, for their ruin and destruction. But the plot came to the king's attention, and he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and he and his sons should be impaled on poles. Right now, the interesting part here is just a quick note on verse 25. It says, so when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised, against the Jews should come back to his own head. Right? We know the real situation with the king. The king was actually tricked, right, or accomplice in a sense, with Haman's first decree. But here it seems to be written in such a way that the king was painted in a bit more favorable light. But we know behind the scenes it was actually Mordechai and Esther who actually resolved this issue. But the edict, of course, was stamped, was given by, written by Mordechai with the king's support and approval. So in a sense that the king was just mentioned, but the name Xerxes was not mentioned. So it can be written. It can be interpreted in 2 ways. A Persian reading this to say, oh, this must refer to the Xerxes, right? So they had no issue with this story. They will not find any contention with this story. But in the case of the Jews reading this, they will also know that there is the hidden king of kings behind all this, right? So this is where it is. Now then it says that he and his sons should be impaled on the poles. Someone wrote a little bit about the sons of Haman, and which I just like to share with us, right? Okay, we know there is 10 sons, but these are just 8 names, right? And apparently these names have some meaning to it, yeah. And so Pashandatha, it seems to apply to the curious, he's like a busybody, a meddling person, a troublemaker, a gossip, a scandal monger, right? Dalphon, right? Weeping self, right? So a person who is full of self-pity, excessive, self-absorbed, yeah, always unhappy with their own troubles. Aspasa, and assemble, self-mobilized, self-sufficient, not depending on God, right? Poratha, right? Is very self-indulgent, impulsive, and so on and so forth, right? What else? Adalia, weak, self-conscious, have an inferiority complex. Aridatha, on the hand, the other end of the extreme, very overly assertive, insistence about his own way. Hamashta, preeminent, ambitious, desire for preeminence over others, wants to hog all the attention to himself, all the glory for himself. Harisai, bold self, right? Imprudence, lacking discretion, good judgment, and lacking maturity. So all this self just remind us, we know that these are this could be the old nature, right? And the fact that these 10 sons are being impaled just reminds us that could we actually crucify our old self, take up the cross daily and follow me. What do we need to crucify on the cross, right? So death to self life is the key to a deeper walk with the Lord. Galatians 2:20 reminds us that I've been, like Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave his life for me. So maybe it's a good way for us when we read this to have this list to think about what are the areas in our life we need to put to death, right? In order that our life with Christ will flourish. So that is just a bit of a pause in there. Verse 26. So therefore, these days are called Purim, from the word Pur. Yeah, because of everything written in this letter and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them. The Jews took it upon themselves to establish a custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should, without fail, observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. Verse 28. And this day should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, in every province, in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordechai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordechai then sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance, and to establish these days of Purim at the designated times, as Mordechai, the Jew, and Queen Esther had decreed for them. And as they established for themselves the descendants in regard of the times of fasting and lamentation, and Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down. It was written down in the records. So this ends chapter 9 in the sense of why today the Jewish people celebrate the festival of Purim, right? It gives them the basis, the reasons why they're called to celebrate and Purim that way. Something about the days of Purim, right? Their days of dancing, the celebration, is that this is, we recognize that this is one of the 2 Jewish festivals that are not commanded in the Old Testament. The other is Hanukkah, it is celebrated somewhere, the festival of lights, that's Hanukkah. It started in the days of the Maccabees, and they celebrated somewhere in November, December, right? So, but Adar is the month of Adar is somehow falls between February and March, right? Okay, so it's celebrated on these 2 days in this way. So it's celebrated. Remember, it's the deliverance of the Jews from the hands of the enemy, right? From the hands of what do they do actually when they celebrate? Number one, they will read. Yeah, they will read the book of Esther. Yeah, and then I mentioned it in lesson 1. Actually, some of the practices. And then when they read the book of Esther, when all the children and a lot of children were given this bracelets. So whenever Hanukkah comes, whenever Haman's name is mentioned, they will rattle, and they will jeer him or make fun of him. So that's what they do, right? The second thing they will do is they will observe a small fast, okay, a small fast that way. And third, okay, they will give gifts to one another. They will remember the poor, right? So that no one is left out of the celebration, right? No one. They will have a wonderful feast, and they have all kinds of makan, okay? And the children would also dress up in costumes. It is to reflect that the fact that Esther's identity was hidden, right? And she was hidden in Mordechai's house growing up, and then in the palace she hid her Jewish identity and so on, right? So the children will dress up in costumes. It's a bit like, in the US they celebrate Halloween and all those. So that's what they celebrate. But what they do is they remember and celebrate their rest from their enemies. The rest from their enemies. So this is what they remember. For us today, right, this is a bit of a reflection in the sense that we have a greater celebration even than Purim, right? We remember that we have been delivered from the death sentence of sin. The wages of sin is death, right? And all this time comes in from Genesis chapter 2. That says when God says to Adam, the moment you eat of the fruit of the from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that day you will die, right? So this sentence, death sentence, is actually irrevocable. It cannot be taken back, right? But thanks be to God, right? Christ issued a second decree, right? That is in the new covenant, written in his blood. On the cross, he actually gave his life, laid down his life for us, right? So that today we have a greater celebration this way. So let's just finish off the final three verses in chapter 10 of Esther. It says, King Xerxes then imposed tribute throughout the empire to these distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordechai, whom the king had promoted, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordechai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. I think this is an amazing conclusion. It seems a little bit like kind of like tacked on a little bit, first of all to talk about the greatness of King Xerxes. Yeah. In the first part, when in chapter 1, we see that King Xerxes actually celebrated or threw a banquet to display his greatness. But now we talk about the greatness of Xerxes, but also the greatness of Mordecai. And Mordecai's greatness is, in a sense, is contrasted, right? Yes, he is second in rank. He is powerful, right? But what is important, he was not boasting about his riches. He was not boasting about his achievements and so on and so forth. He was held in high esteem because he worked for the good of his people. He spoke up for the welfare of the Jews. We need more government officials like him. We need more politicians like him. Yeah, I think this is something that for us to remember. So we see Mordecai's devotion. He did his job as a second in command properly, right? Okay. He was devoted to his job. I think for all of us who are entrusted with the responsibility to handle a job, remember it's a Persian, the Persian government or the Persian Empire. It's not a Jewish empire, right? It's a Persian empire. He was working in, like in today's, we work for a secular government, or we work for or a company that may not be Christians, but yet our responsibility is to make sure that we do our job properly. That is the first thing I noticed. The second thing, of course, like I mentioned, he worked for the good of his people. He was on the lookout. I mean, he could have, says he could have changed once he's got to the second in command. Right? He says, you should be serving me now. Right? Hey, remember how I rescued you? Now you should, you should. I'm now calling back my favors, right? But he did not. He continued to serve his people humbly. And that, I believe, for us as Christians, the higher we go, in a sense of our responsibility, the more humble we should. We must remember that we need to work for the good of those around us. And he continued not only work for the good, he was not only in the background, but he also was vocal. He spoke up for the welfare of the Jews. I continue to pray even for our leaders in our country. And the recent news that's happening, sometimes we get very disappointed when we do not see some of our people in authority do not speak up for the welfare of those who have been wronged. Okay, so let's remember that. So, and all these points relate to a righteous king, right? Like Mordechai, points to a king whom the psalmist in Psalm 72 longs for. And the king is the one who would judge his people with righteousness, would take care and take care of the justice, right? And to make sure that afflicted ones, those who are disadvantaged, will be taken care of. So you can see the whole list in Psalm 72 about what a king should be. And we look forward to the King of Kings, to Christ who will come again and establish his kingdom. So that in essence covers our chapters and our studies in the book of Esther. What I'd like to round up is this particular reflection. Can we see Christ in the book of Esther? Can we see Christ in the book of Esther? How does the book of Esther foreshadow Jesus? Can we see that? Okay. I've just pointed out some, and I hope that later on when we open our discussion, then you may be able to also share some of your insights. Okay. Let me just run through some of my list. We see that, for example, Mordecai and Esther, all right, come from very simple backgrounds, all right? They're nobodies in the sense of human background, but they got promoted into royalty. Yeah. So if you look at Christ, right, Joseph and Mary, his human background is also, they're poor, right? Okay. Mary had to offer only 2 doves. They can only offer 2 doves as a sacrifice. So we see that they have very humble background, right? But yet Christ rose, right? Is ultimately the King of Kings, right? Secondly, you see how Esther was willing to, when she was queen, but she was willing to lay down, put her royalty, her crown on the line, her very life on the line. If I perish, I perish. Why? For the sake of rescuing, for the love of her people, for the sake of rescuing them. And she was willing to give everything. And we see Christ as well, right? He himself, left the glories of heaven and came down, born as a baby, and then taking the form of a servant. Philippians will learn about that, right? And gave him, even surrendered his life on the cross in order that we may be saved. Right? So this is something. Yeah. So we see also Esther, advocating, pleading for her people to King Xerxes. And Christ today is also our advocate as well, pleading on our behalf, pleading using by means of his blood and sacrifice for us. Mordechai took Esther in as a father. She was an orphan, and today Christ, because of Christ, God has become a father to the fatherless as well. Right? We have been adopted into his family in that way. Right? Mordecai was a Jew who was despised, okay, who was hated in a sense by Haman, right? And Jesus himself was hated by the religious leaders. He was despised, and you read in Isaiah as well. He was a man rejected by his own people, but yet he brought about peace. You see, Mordecai actually reveals secrets, right? And Christ also is a revealer of the secret things of God, right? Yeah, if Jesus said, if you know me, you know the Father as well, right? He says, I call you friends. Yeah, he told his disciples, no longer servants, but I call you friends, because a servant does not know his master, but friends do, right? Yeah, so he's a revealer of secrets. We see Haman as depicted, like the man of lawlessness, right? And this is a person who was set himself up in the political realm to basically take control and wanted to destroy God's people, but yet he is overcome by God's king. Okay, so we can see this in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 8 as well, right? Let me just read 2 Thessalonians verse 8. Okay, it says, then the lawless one will be revealed, and the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. So we see Christ as the one who suffers with us. We see him as the one who pleads for us by his advocate on our behalf. We see him who's the one who provides hope for us. He's the one who saves us and defeats our enemies. He's the one who works for our good, like the way Mordecai works for the good of his people. The one who positions us in places of authority and influence. We have been seated in the heavenly realms, and the one who wants us to remember our deliverance. That is what the Lord's Supper is all about, that we celebrate. So what about you? Are there things that you have learned about Christ? What lessons have you learned in the book of Esther? Now, before I open up, let me just share this and invite you. We will post this link on our PBC News, PBC News group, and I hope that it's a simple evaluation form, which we hope that you can help to fill in after this book study in Esther. So the first question is, once you fill it in, you just click and say, okay, this I'm reflecting on Esther, and these are a few questions. I just type in your responses. If they ask for 3, if you can't give 3, it's fine. You can give 1. You can give more if you wish, but you just fill in as much as you can. This will be very helpful for us because it will help us improve. Our church Bible study in the book of Esther is under our Christian education ministry, so it will help us improve it will also help us identify your areas of interest in what books you like to study. There are suggestions there on the questionnaire that you may want to put it in. All right, I'd like to study this following book, then we can arrange it. Help us plan ahead in terms of what we want to cover, and it will also, your feedback will also encourage our facilitators. So all in all, I just want to say thank you very much for just hanging in there with us in all these 10 lessons of the book of Esther. Right. So with this, I'd just like to open up for some sharing and discussion for about 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. Then I'll pass the time to. All right. So I'd love to hear from all of you, any one of you, to say maybe some things that you have learned from the book of Esther that you find it, helpful for you, or maybe even questions that you may like to ask, but that I may not have covered. So I'll see whether we can address it either immediately or later on in a separate document for you. Any thoughts on the book of Esther? Is Esther relevant for our situation today? You can unmute yourself.
Let me start.
Sure, please. Yeah.
All right. So I think the most profound statement that I can see from Esther is if I perish, I perish. That to me has always touched me, because she had, in a sense, nothing to gain and everything to lose because of her status. Last time Pastor also mentioned. But I think seeing her people die would have brought her more pain than living in the palace. So I thought that I think we need to have a right perspective, that maybe in our comfort and status and all the things that we have, but we think about the people who will perish, the unbelievers, our family members, as Dave always likes to remind us, those who are outside the church. There are brothers and sisters there who have not yet come, actually. Jesus said that there are still sheep that is still not in the flock, and I call. So, it's very difficult. If I perish will call us for self-sacrifice. And I think that something to reflect deeper on, because I wouldn't dare say that I am that level yet, but God have mercy on my soul. Yeah, that's my sharing.
Thank you, Terence. Yeah, indeed, actually, some things that if God calls you to a particular destiny, all right, I think that you come to a point whereby you're no longer satisfied with where you are. You're willing to leave your comfort zone, step out of your comfort zone to fulfill that destiny. Right? Somewhere in your soul, you will have to struggle, like like Esther did, isn't it? Right? On the first challenge of Mordechai. What am I going to do with that? Okay, thank you, Terence. Anybody else? Please, I'd love to hear from you.
Maybe I will second. For me, it's just now, like Pastor mentioned about Mordechai, when he became second in command, but he was still humbly serving the Jews. So for me, it's sometimes when we maybe in work, like we go up in the ranks, and then sometimes we kind of like feel superior and think that other people owe us something. So Mordecai sets a good example that even he went up higher and higher, but he still humbly served others. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very powerful situation. I think the world says that the higher you go, then you are going to call in favors, ask people for, yeah, and it's like, okay, you're going to use the position for your advantage. But Mordecai, it is a reverse. He uses position to give, give favor in a sense, to help people out. Thank you, Brian. Any others? Yes, Lily. Lily, your no sound at the moment. You're unmute, but no sound. Still no sound.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, that's right. Okay, thank you.
These earbuds are not working for the microphone.
Oh,
Yeah, I think something to note and what impressed me is the obedience of Esther.
mhm.
Willing to leave the comfort of a home to go to the king's harem, knowing that it's such a dangerous situation. I mean, the king is so volatile. Yeah, she could be killed. She could be very badly ill-treated, and also knowing that once she goes in, she cannot come out. So I think it is such a profound obedience, which I seldom find among our children nowadays. Yeah, even our own generation, how obedient are we to our parents? Right? I know my parent wanted me to study something, and I ended up studying something else. So even I wasn't obedient to my parents. So I think Esther is a real model of obedience. Yeah, and is a good model for the generations after her.
Yes. Yeah, especially in obedience, I think the two aspects I can see. For her to go into the king's palace, there's no choice in a sense. She'll either go or she'll be killed, I think, in that sense. But her obedience is shown very strongly in her relationship with Mordechai, which is like the parent child. When Mordechai says you should do this or you should keep your identity secret, yeah, she did that. Okay. So that was a very powerful observation, and she remained also very humble, even though she's queen. So that she had this gentle spirit, very attractive spirit. Any others? We still have time for, one or two more reflections, and then we will close.
Something I want to mention about Haman.
Yeah, yes, very good.
I think the Haman remind us of this current, remind us of some of these people currently in our society who are too status conscious. And when they are up there, they expect everyone to give in to them, to kowtow to them, and if you don't do that, they will treat you as an enemy. So I see so Haman give us a very good warning that if we act like Haman, we will be planning our own downfall. Yeah, because if Haman's downfall is all his own making, because of his too status conscious, Mordecai doesn't like this type of people. And if you don't like him, you are his enemy. It's just like our society these days. If you are not with me, you are my enemies. So something we need to be aware of.
True. Yeah. Actually, a character study in Haman would be very, very interesting. Even I had in my study, we actually studied also about leadership approaches and styles between Haman and Mordecai and Esther as well. But we don't have time to go through that. So Haman is a very interesting guy. He had everything, but yet he had nothing. He's like he needs all the externals, like what Father Quek talked about, and the status to boost up his empty heart in a sense. Yeah. So that's good observation. One more before we close. Yes, Brother Peter.
I was just scratching my head actually. Okay, anyway, since you mentioned my name, I like to refer to what Brother Terence said, that Esther said, if I perish, I perish. But if you notice that before she said those words, you look back, before she said that, it's not like just, okay, if I perish, I perish. But you note that before she said that, in reply to Mordechai, what did she do? She asked all the Jews together, who are in Susa, and fast for her. Okay? And do not eat. This is verse 16 of chapter 2 or 3, I don't know. Okay? They say, do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. Then she said, I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So that was preparedness, you know. And in the face of such a severe danger, you know, the first thing she did was to ask the people to fast. And we have talked about that. The fasting is also including of prayer, right? So I think this is what we can pick up from that when facing very serious problems or danger, that's the first thing we need to do. Really, with all sincerity, come before God, fast and pray, and cry unto God. 3 days and 3 nights, no eating, no drinking. Okay, so I think we have to ask ourselves, do we come to such a place right now? Are we facing such a serious situation, especially looking at the COVID-19? Are the people coming together to pray and fast before God? You know, that's just one problem. What about other things that we are facing that it's really, we really need to call upon God. So I think this is a reminder to us. She called all the people, all the Jews together. So this is a call for corporate prayer, corporate fasting. I think we should apply that to our church also. Okay.
Thank you, Brother Peter. I think this is a very important point. I think a very timely point for us. To remind us, like normally when armies or go into battle, they try to control the air first, right? They're bombing, they're trying to soften up the enemy, then the boots hit the ground. Yeah. So our times of fasting and the present times of prayer, actually, allowing us to take control over the spiritual atmosphere, the spiritual air, over a situation. So yeah, whatever situation may be, difficulties, challenges, uncertainty, discouragement, and all those spiritual attacks, all these things need to come under the authority of Christ. We can only do that, if we do fast and pray. Let me just close in a sense my appreciation, my personal appreciation, in a 4-hour prayer group here. Yeah, I mean, in all the years that I first joined the church, I've always attended the prayer meeting, and having to deal with, and when taking on the role of leadership in different capacities, and now and for the last 15 years, in the sense that as a pastor, right, I've always been very, very grateful and for our prayer group on a Wednesday, for church prayer group. There has been attempts, suggestions, I would say, to say, why do we need to pray on Wednesday? Why not pray in different different groups, different families? I said that's something extra, but for me, the church prayer meeting, our time together as a church to pray together, for me it was crucial, it was critical for my personal encouragement and also to pull me out of some really difficult situations. Yeah. So it has sustained me and personally, and also I believe it has sustained the church through some really difficult times. Yeah. So for me, I just want to say, and with this note, I'll say thank you to all of you who are in the church, who join us in the church prayer meeting. Yeah. Wherever you are, whatever situation. So let's hope to continue. If we ever get back to in person, right? I would want to still do what we call a hybrid, which Zach actually started. A hybrid. That means those who really cannot come in person to the prayer meeting, we will do this as well. They can zoom in and pray together. Yeah, but Yap, you got some? Yeah, you'd like to share something else?
Yeah, thank you, Pastor. Thank you for the encouragement. There's one other point that I noted from this last lesson is we always pray for a generation that will rise up like Joshua, like Joseph, like Ruth, like Esther. And normally these are young generation that we desire to rise up. But in this lesson, I also learned that not only a new generation to rise up, but there are a lot of, in this case, Mordechai, that people who are matured, behind the scene, humble, unsung heroes. In this case, and a very, very underrated unsung hero that did so much, save the whole nation. And you don't see Mordecai's name mentioned very much in prayers. But yeah, an unsung hero that I think deserve more mention and being exemplar for many of the mature or older generation Christian in the church that can play many roles, like what Mordecai has played.
Thank you. Indeed, right? The old and the young must work together. Okay, with this, Brian, you will allow me just to close in a prayer. Okay. Let's come before the Lord. Thank you again, Lord, for helping us